Update. Am I the a-hole for not going back to my wife after she threatened to call the cops on me? Original post. My wife and I recently welcomed our 6-month-old baby. And since my wife returned from the hospital, it feels like everything has changed drastically. Before this, we were the kind of couple you'd think had it all. Never argued, always happy, and just solid. But now, it's like the person I knew and loved is gone. Her anger and resentment toward me are so intense, I can practically feel it whenever I'm near her. I tried to brush it off, thinking it might just be the exhaustion and stress from having a newborn, but it only got worse. After months of tiptoeing around, I finally reached my limit. 2 days ago, it all exploded. We got into a terrible fight that quickly turned into a shouting match. I couldn't believe the things we were saying to each other. It was the worst fight we've ever had, and in the middle of it, she screamed that she'd call the police on me. That statement stopped me cold. I wasn't even yelling anymore. I was just standing there, stunned. I felt betrayed and heartbroken, like a stranger was standing in front of me, not the woman I'd married. When she finally stormed off to another room, I just sat there in silence, unable to process what had happened. I felt like I was backed into a corner. It hit me hard that this wasn't just some heated argument we'd look back on and laugh about later. This was something that could change my life in ways I couldn't imagine. I didn't want to be in a situation where I was at risk of having the police involved over a misunderstanding or an accusation. So I made a decision. I grabbed whatever I could think of, some clothes, my phone, and my keys, and left. Now I'm staying at a friend's place. He's been really supportive, but he says I'm just not myself these days. And he's right. I feel like a shell of the person I was. My wife, meanwhile, has been reaching out, saying she wants to talk. My mother-in-law even came over with my baby, asking me to hold her and see if that might help heal things. But I had to refuse. As much as it hurt to say no, I knew that if I held my daughter, I'd be tempted to go back home. And then what? Go back into a situation where a single argument could lead to a call to the cops? My mother-in-law is trying to mediate, making excuses for my wife. She's telling me that my wife didn't mean it, that it was just words said in the heat of the moment. But that's not something you can take lightly. I can't just forget that she threw that threat out there. It changes the entire foundation of trust we built over the years. My mind is constantly spinning, and a sense of loss weighs heavy on me. I lost my home, my wife, my child, and a life we built together all in one moment. People tell me to just talk it out with her, that maybe I'm overreacting. But how do you talk out something like this? How do you go back to normal after feeling betrayed like that? I'm dealing with depression on top of everything else, and I keep questioning if there's even a path forward for us. Is there a way to forgive and forget? Or has the trust really been shattered beyond repair? Now for the top comments before reading the update 25 days later. Can you explain why the threat of cops being called is an issue at all? Are there marks on her? Do you have warrants? You can't go to jail for having a verbal argument. Cops don't care if my kind has done anything bad, they just shoot. I don't have warrants, but I have had cops harassing me for hours for simply walking. I don't even remember why verbal arguments started, but it was a mix of everything wrong with me, my family, and other BS. Can I ask how your wife was radiating hatred? Did you talk to her about how you felt? Did she know you thought she hated you? What do you mean when you say you snapped? What does that entail exactly? Was there something specific you said or did that made your wife threaten to call the cops? Or did it just come out of nowhere? Did she say what she was gonna tell them when they got there? You said after tolerating a lot you snapped. What did she do that you were tolerating? Do you know anything about PPD or other postpartum conditions? Would you recognize the symptoms? I know that's a lot of questions, but I just feel like there's a lot of context missing here that could drastically change the story. Would you be asking the context if OP was a woman? Extreme personality change is a mental health emergency considering you have a helpless infant. Yes, PPD is real, and sickness and health are in the vows usually. It's her first baby, and she doesn't even realize it probably. And so what? If he does get falsely accused and ends up having his life ruined, at least he fulfilled his vows? This is insane. As somebody that has been arrested due to both a woman and laws in place, he will get screwed. My state has a mandatory arrest for a DV call. Dude will only make his life more difficult. I was in jail with a guy who called the cops on his wife for punching him, and he was in there with me. Now for the update. I did talk to her on the phone, and she can't seem to comprehend why I was so upset that she threatened to call the cops on me. It was like she couldn't wrap her head around the gravity of what she has done. She did apologize, but she still thinks I overreacted. As soon as I left, my eating disorder vanished. Then when I talked to her on the phone, the depression started settling again. I have filed for divorce. I have no clue what the divorce will look like, but one thing I know is that I will never feel safe with my wife again ever. Divorce is the right thing to do, for both of us. Don't talk to her on the phone or in person without a lawyer present. Text her or email her that all communication must be through a lawyer going forward. She was already ready to make up stories to the cops about you, which means she was full or ready to ruin your life. Don't give her the chance to make stuff up with no witnesses present to point out she's full of it. Get a voice recording app on your phone and make it easily accessible. She might try to contact you in person. Document everything. Basically, threatening to call the cops during an argument, especially when no one's getting hurt or in actual danger, is a really bad move. It's like using the police as a weapon, and it can have some seriously messed up consequences for the person on the receiving end of that threat. I'm really confused on why people are condoning divorce so quickly. Like, okay, I get it. If your wife has been threatening to call the cops on you on a regular basis, this is a fair reaction. But 6 months after giving birth with a drastic personality change, untreated PPD is a very real thing. Take some space sure to protect yourself. Document. But just jumping to divorce? Seems kinda a-holish to me. This update is 25 days later and nothing in the original post or the update suggests that the wife is doing anything to recognize it might be PPD and get it treated. If it were 2 days later, I might say bring it up and see how she reacts. But after almost a month? If she's still downplaying what she did and not mentioning working to get some sort of treatment, it suggests to me that either there's a conversation where OP mentioned it and his wife blew it off, and or that no one else in the wife's orbit has mentioned it. If OP's wife was coming from a place of, I did something really horrible, I haven't been myself, I need help, then maybe divorce isn't the only option. But if the writing is on the wall that he is going to have to fight uphill against his wife, and potentially a lot of people around her to get a PPD diagnosis and treatment to explain this, I don't blame him for walking away from that. And even if she was getting PPD treated, sometimes the betrayal that one partner does during a mental health crisis is too big to overcome. It can also be used as a tactic to minimize what she did. Like, you can't be mad at me for that, I had PPD. So a diagnosis is not always a solution in these cases. Not a-hole. Tell mother-in-law that her daughter needs counseling and perhaps medical treatment for PPD, and until that happens, you are in danger from her. You might also express the child might be in danger also, and try to get emergency custody for either yourself or your mother-in-law. Do not make any promises of reconciliation, and never be alone with your wife. I am sorry you are experiencing this, OP. I am also sorry for your wife, as she is obviously suffering some form of mental illness at the moment. However, you need to protect yourself first and foremost. See if the lawyer can file something with police as she keeps making threats, etc. Next story. Am I the a-hole for using my scared pregnant wife's cravings against her to drive her to the hospital during labor when she absolutely wouldn't? My wife and I have been together for 6 years, and a few months ago we welcomed our first child, a beautiful baby girl. However, the tension between us began on the day of our daughter's birth and hasn't let up since. In the final 2 months of her pregnancy, my wife was overwhelmed with anxiety about giving birth. As her due date approached, she became so distressed that she couldn't even speak with her doctor without breaking down at the mere mention of labor. She seemed to be in denial, as if ignoring it would somehow make it go away. I tried to encourage her to see a therapist or at least talk to someone, but she shut me down every time, insisting she just wasn't ready. On the day she went into labor, she was clearly experiencing strong contractions, yet she kept insisting they were minor and refused to go to the hospital. My mother, her mother, both of our sisters, and I all tried to reason with her, but nothing seemed to get through. She was determined to stay home, even though she was obviously in active labor. At that point, my sister and I knew we had to step in. Throughout her pregnancy, my wife had been craving churros, so my sister casually mentioned she was going to pick up some, hoping this might coax her out of the house. My wife, eager for the distraction, agreed to go along. However, my sister and I had already decided we were taking her straight to the hospital. When she realized our plan, her face fell. She started to cry and panic in the car, but we knew it was the only way. Thankfully, everything went smoothly, and she delivered safely. Both she and the baby were healthy. It's been a few months, but my wife continues to bring up that day, throwing it in my face whenever we argue. Each time, I apologize and reassure her, explaining that I understood her fear and that my intentions were only for her safety and our babies. There was no ill will, yet she continues to paint me as if I had done something terrible. This time, when she brought it up again, I finally snapped. I told her that if she thinks she's helping our marriage by being this way, she's wrong. I told her that if I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't hesitate, because in that moment, I couldn't trust her judgment for the safety of herself and our baby. I explained that I would no longer engage in this conversation unless she's willing to communicate in a constructive, healthy way. In response, she accused me of dismissing and stonewalling her, calling me an a-hole for standing firm on wanting productive communication. I don't respond well to name-calling, especially since I've never spoken to her or anyone in that way. My frustration boiled over and I ended up saying something I now regret. Talk to me in that tone again and you'll be a single mom real quick. She hasn't stopped crying since. I feel terrible because I know my words were harsh, but I felt like I needed to stand up for myself after months of being constantly berated. Now I'm questioning if I went too far or if this was the only way to get through to her. Now for the top comments. If you still want to remain married, I suggest speaking to her healthcare provider and therapists, or reach out to service providers to see why she is acting this way. They also need to see a counselor. It's never a bad idea, but wife needs it yesterday. OP does not. Not the a-hole, but you have a bigger problem. She was putting herself and your baby at risk. She does not sound mentally sound. If she cannot see that still after all this time, you have a big problem that needs professional intervention. Yeah, for real. I can understand being upset at that time, especially since she was dealing with so much anxiety. I had panic attacks at the thought of giving birth when I was pregnant with my first. It's an absolute horrifying thought. She should be able to look at the situation now and understand that OP stepped up and made a hard choice to take matters into his own hands. He kept his wife and child safe. I'm really not sure what she thought was going to happen otherwise. Last story. Am I the a-hole for wanting to leave my husband after he blamed me for our baby's death and started treating me like an animal? 2 years ago, we lost our 8-month-old son to pneumonia. I was devastated, and the guilt and pain have never left me. I did everything I could for him. I took him to every appointment, gave him his medication, and followed all the doctor's orders. But even after all that, he didn't survive. I thought my husband and I would grieve together, but instead, he has spent these 2 years blaming me, constantly reminding me that a better mother wouldn't have let this happen. The worst part is how he treats me now. Since our son's death, he's turned cold and cruel, treating me like an animal. He's openly disrespectful, dismissive, and degrading, and he brings up our son's death at every opportunity to paint me as a failure. It hurts even more because he's taken this grief as a free pass to cheat on me, and I'm just expected to accept it. A few months ago, I saw him in the mall with another woman. They were walking together, laughing, and he looked happy. I confronted them both on the spot, hoping he'd at least feel some shame, but instead he got furious. He turned it around on me as saying I had no right to be upset when, according to him, I'm the reason he lost his son in the first place. He even told the woman I was unstable, and she looked at me with pity, like I was some kind of deranged ex. That moment felt like I hit rock bottom. Now I'm at a breaking point. I don't know if I can take any more of his abuse, accusations, or infidelity. But every time I consider leaving, I feel like he'll just tell everyone that I abandoned him and couldn't handle my supposed guilt. Some people in his family already think I'm the reason our son died, thanks to what he's been saying behind my back. It's like he set me up to look like a monster no matter what I do. Am I the a-hole for finally wanting to walk away from this marriage? Or am I selfish for even thinking of leaving him while he's still grieving, even if his grief has turned into resentment and cruelty toward me? Not the a-hole. He abandoned you 2 years ago. Filed for divorce stating the reason is abuse and infidelity. Tell everyone what happens behind closed doors. He is verbally and mentally abusing you. If it is your fault, then you should recognize that it's more his than anyone's. Did he drive your child to appointments? Of course he didn't. Did he do everything in his power like you? It seems not. I'm sorry for your loss, and I hope you can escape this POS so you can heal. He did abandon me emotionally long ago, but I've been clinging to the idea that we could somehow rebuild, even as he's torn me down. I needed to hear that it's okay to be honest about what's really happening, and that filing for divorce isn't a failure on my part. Your point about his lack of involvement really hit home. I realize I've been carrying the weight of this alone. He's purposely treating you like garbage so he can get rid of you, plus play the victim again for being abandoned. You know he's the victim no matter what you do, so you might as well leave and get your life back. I hope you can get some grief counseling. What he said and done is totally unhinged and unacceptable. Not the a-hole. No parent should have to endure the loss of a child, and it's heartbreaking that your husband has turned his grief into something so cruel and destructive. You did everything you could for your son, and no one has the right to blame you for his illness or his passing. The way your husband is treating you, using your son's death to manipulate, control, and degrade you, is abusive and completely unacceptable. You deserve support, compassion, and a chance to heal, not to be treated like this. Walking away from this toxic behavior is not selfish. It's an act of self-preservation. You have every right to prioritize your well-being and find a path to healing, even if that means leaving him. It's been incredibly hard, and sometimes I feel like I'm losing my mind trying to justify staying with someone who constantly twists my grief into something I should be ashamed of. I love my son with everything I had, and hearing someone else say I did my best helps more than you know. Part of me keeps hoping my husband will come around, but with everything he's done and said, I'm realizing that his pain doesn't excuse his cruelty. Your words make me feel a little less alone and a bit more justified in thinking about leaving and focusing on my own healing.